I'm not sure if anyone can hear me, but I can still see the countdown timer. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys, we just had a bit of a tech issue there. Welcome to Normal Island Live. I am Lewis Aaron. We are having a little bit of tech issues, typical turn left stuff. However, we've had to move to a slightly different software today because we were having so many issues. So now that we've moved to this software, we'll see what happens today. I'm sure all you care about is hearing our wonderful voices, hopefully, and seeing some of your wonderful comments. So again, apologies ahead of time for any tech issues, but I am joined today by the wonderful Callum. Hello, Callum. How's it going?
Hello, I'm all right. How are you?
I am not bad. There is so much going on. I don't know where to look. I don't know how to keep up. I know I
It's
pretty
always
much
the
say
way.
that every single show, but there is so much going on.
It's always the way. I've had quite an eventful day as well, actually. Today, I've had lots of meetings with lots of dogs, which has been great. I helped a 90-year-old man find his way home, which was interesting. And then I've had a quick listen and look at the news and everything that's going on in the world, which is also insane as always. So I think it's just one of
Helping
those days,
dogs,
to be honest,
helping
Liz.
old people. See, guys, this is the left. This is the real left. Bet none of those reform voters out there are doing these things.
Cuddles with four rescue dogs of different sizes and shapes that have come over from Spain, which was so they're technically asylum seeking dogs as well. So
Oh, well, I'll just stick to my cat for now, which hopefully little Jojo, will remain asleep today
Jojo,
during today's show.
bring him
But if
on.
we hear a little meow in the background and I need to open the door, then I'll have to do that, and he can say hi to everyone. But let's move on to today's stories because we have a lot going on. So, we're going to be talking about Trump's betrayal of its allies, reform, and now descending into civil war. Who saw that coming? And we have the new sentencing guidelines in the UK that are causing a bit of a storm. So, we're going to talk about all of those things. But we will quickly do today's story. So the first story isn't really one story. It's kind of an amalgamation of all the things that are kind of going on right now into one tidbit, but we're going to be focusing obviously around the US, the Ukraine, and me just wondering what the fuck is going on. So I'm just going to do a few highlights of things that have happened over the last couple of days, kind of bring it all into one, and then we can talk about it. I do know, and it's not on what's in front of me right now, that just before we went live, the EU have agreed to 800 million euros of spending across Europe. So we can kind of throw that in there too. But we will talk about the Trump administration quickly, who have been secretly meeting with Ukrainian politicians on behalf of the opposition of Zelensky, trying to figure out ways to trigger an election and oust Zelensky and bring back other leaders into power. An American coup? Never. They've never done that before, have they, guys? America trying to oust a leader in a foreign country to put somebody else in place that they prefer? That's not new at all. But then we have obviously another US story, again, forcing all of its allies to stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine, which comes after the US then cutting military aid off to Ukraine. And so it seems like they're just handing Russia an even bigger win. And this is going to cause the deaths of civilians and soldiers. And who else knows what could happen with this lack of intelligence now being shared with the Ukrainians? And on top of this, a rumor that Trump is about to revoke the refugee status of around 250,000 Ukrainians in the US. Again, just adding more to this crazy pile of things that we have going on. It's just insane, all the things that are going on right now. Then we have at least one person telling the truth. And all of this, one person telling the truth, nobody saying everything's fine, we're going to work this out. The Ukrainian ambassador to the UK said today that the US is destroying the international rules-based order by trying to meet Russia halfway. At least somebody is saying the quiet part out loud. Then, obviously, we had Macron yesterday, which has caused quite a stir. And when he did his address to the nation, he was saying to people that we need to prepare for a future where the US might not be on our side. Who saw that one coming with everything that they've been doing? And then just to keep throwing more into the pile, we've obviously got the trade war that the US has kicked off again with Canada and Mexico and China going into full swing. And Justin Trudeau actually got on camera and said that he believes this is a move by Trump to weaken Canada to then annex it. And then the UK is apparently waiting and preparing for the US to pull out of Trident. Again, just more stuff. This is why I can't keep up with the news, guys. There's just so much going on. But this would cost taxpayers just absolute billions, wasted investment, and it puts Europe and obviously us at even more risk. And then it further widens this gap between the US and its allies. And I know there's probably so much more going on right now. I've chosen these stories all together as a highlight because I want to try and kind of, zoom out a little bit and look at everything. So, Callum, what is going on? So much going on. Where do you want to start?
I have no idea. I saw as well before we came on that Trump's also calling for a new election in Ukraine, arguing that there needs to be an election and Zelensky needs to go. To my memory, Zelensky had already said that he'd happily stand down if it meant that we
He
could get
did.
peace in Ukraine. Um, I, I feel sorry for the Ukrainians because America's been such a strong ally, and almost overnight, that's just completely flipped on its head. And I was trying to think the other night, what would we do if we were in that situation when we were at war, and the country that had provided us with a lot of support and a lot of
Mm.
financial and physical military support as well, had just suddenly overnight decided that they were no longer going to do it. Um, it's a mess. Like I've said to you previously when we've talked about Trump, I don't even know where to begin with Trump anymore. I just feel like I've woken up in a alternative universe.
And that's just how it keeps feeling every day. Obviously, we knew from Trump's last term, which again, people keep talking about this idea, and they talked about it after he won, but before he was inaugurated, that, we survived 4 years of Trump before. But this time they're organized. They've got the entire plan. They've got the Heritage Foundation with its Project 2025. He's got people who are utterly and completely loyal to him, people who weren't even previously ever loyal to him, people who opposed him who are now bending the knee. And now, because of this organization that they've got, they are causing havoc and they're going down this insane path, which is just utterly destabilizing the world in many ways. Um, but what's also frustrating is that they're tooting this idea of America first, while pulling away from all of its allies and saying, "Look, America first. We're not funding any of this anymore." But then again, Trump reiterating at at his State of the Union speech, "We're going to get Greenland one way or the other," and then obviously within the same week, the
And
trade war with Canada, Mexico, China is it's just continuing hostility.
did you see the speech that he gave the other night? Because
The
it,
highlights. I'm not. It was 100 minutes. It was the longest speech in State of the
I
Union history. I'm not watching all of that.
I sat and watched a big chunk of it as it was going out, to be fair, and it was horrific. It was horrific. The way that he was tokenizing people, families of victims of horrific crimes. There was a kid who'd suffered with a brain cancer who'd um, always wanted to join the police, who he gave like an honorary sort of CIA membership to.
Hmm.
And don't get me wrong, like it was
Oh no, I
cute,
think it was the
but
Secret Service.
a
I think.
Secret Service, sorry. It was sweet, it was cute, and for that kid, I think he was 13. He's been through a lot, and but it was also sickening to watch him use a child in that way. He was, he had families of victims of horrendous murders and attacks, where the perpetrator had been somebody that wasn't American, and was using them to argue his anti-immigration stance, and to change the rules and the laws around dealing with immigration, bringing in one example was the wife of a police officer who'd been murdered on duty, who he used her story of her and her partner to introduce a law bringing in the death penalty to anyone who takes the life of a police officer. Um, and it was just, all his mates were cheering and clapping and giving him. They were up and down. It was like the hokey cokey. It was a standing ovation literally every 30 seconds. Um, but it was frightening, and it was sickening seeing him use people in that way as well, particularly people that have been through some horrendous things. And then obviously we had all the gender critical stuff, all the anti-trans nonsense that he came out with, using a girl, a woman who'd had an incident. I can't remember the details of it. It was something to do with she'd been she'd been injured by a trans athlete in one of the college games or something. Excuse me. And
Yeah, again, just what? Yeah, I saw that again. Just weaponizing. Look, like there are there are millions of trans people in this world, right? Some
yeah,
of them are going to be bad, just like everybody else, right? There's going to be women out there, men. There's going to be black people, Muslims. All these people are capable of committing crimes. Okay, but like highlighting the crimes that specific trans people commit. If you've got 350 million Americans and it's what 0.5 to 1% of the population, so we're talking about maybe a couple of million to 3 million trans people in the
yeah.
US. Are they expecting none of those people to ever commit a crime? Because this is what's happening. Every time they do, it's front page news, and this is the
It
problem. It's
was
been
it,
weaponized.
it was horrific, but seeing that speech in the context of everything else that's been going on, and I mean, as foreign policy is concerned, um, I'm surprised actually that Zelensky said he's ready to sign this minerals deal because I let out sort of a little cheer of happiness when I heard that he'd left the White House. Although I think some reports said he was actually asked to leave early um, without signing it, because I mean it's
Mm.
clearly extortion what Trump's doing. But the fact that now Zelensky's going back and saying, "Oh, actually, we can, all right, well, let's sign that deal." It's just a shame. I'm just horrified by that whole thing. But I don't get what, like, I understand the America First sentiment, but I don't understand how allying up to Russia helps, and demonizing and isolating not only some of America's most, historic, long-standing allies, but also immediate neighbors like Canada, for God's sake. Like, I don't understand how that puts America first, because it making enemies of your allies surely weakens you.
Yeah, so I still speak to Trump supporters online, not purposely, when they just turn up in
A
online
glutton
debate
for
spaces like
punishment, Lewis.
TikTok. But a lot of them are just convinced this is just Trump being tough. They've eaten up the lies of like the fentanyl that's apparently coming across the Canada border, which makes up 1% of all fentanyl in the US. They're talking about the people who are crossing over the border, which is again very few and far between. And they're just saying he's only doing this to be tough. Like this is going to end one day. But when you've got your allies literally saying we think we're going to get annexed, like this is Trump trying to annex us, it's very sad not to see the American people wake up. Obviously, the people who oppose Trump, excuse me, the people who oppose Trump are obviously screaming it from wherever they can. But obviously, Trump supporters themselves, they just think he's playing a tough man game, and this is the most frustrating part. That going back to the State of the Union speech, going back to simply everything that Trump has done just within the last month, there's just no shift in his support, really. Yeah, there's some polling saying he's, very unpopular at the moment or becoming more unpopular. But ultimately, when I talk about a weakening in his support, is that nobody is standing up to him who has the power to stand up to him. Obviously, the Dems are powerless, but people within his own party aren't doing anything. There's been the odd comment here and there. Mitch McConnell has suddenly found a soul, and he's now standing up to Trump, but he's no longer even the leader of the Senate, so he has no power. And this is what's frustrating because Trump is already pushing the bounds of the Constitution. He's signed multiple executive orders, which completely not
Can you
even just push.
explain?
Go
Sorry
ahead.
to interrupt. Can you explain what the making English the official language order was about? Because as far as I was aware, English was always and already the official language of the United States. What
Yeah.
was that
So
about? Have I missed something?
So it's important to note that an executive order is not law. It's a kind of directive to the federal branches, meaning like whatever influence they have through the federal branch, they can influence it in that way. So officially, at the federal level, English is the official language now, according to this executive order. But that does not actually mean by law that English is the official language in the US. The US has never had an official language. That's a lot of countries
Ah,
don't
okay.
have official languages, and America is one of them. It's not legally binding. It's just a simple directive. And again, obviously, it's just playing to the base because obviously, people, when it comes to the rhetoric against migrants from South America, there's like I think 40 million Spanish speakers in America. Obviously, that ties into his America First kind of rhetoric. This
So
is an
so in
English speaking
practice,
country.
so in practice, then presumably that leads to no sort of government publications being put out in Spanish for the Spanish speakers or in other languages. Is that
Perhaps.
essentially what it could lead to?
It could lead to that, yeah. We don't know exactly what it is actually going to lead to so far, but yeah, that is obviously
Mm,
one possibility. The US government does offer translations of certain things. There are people
yeah.
who are in America who only speak Spanish, for example, or perhaps other languages. And it almost kind of ties into like Rupert Lowe as well. We're not going to talk about the reform war yet, but this is kind of the stuff that Rupert Lowe has been trying to do in the UK. He's been, gathering data from HMRC and seeing how much HMRC has been spending on translators and interpreters. And his whole stance is, why are we paying for this? If somebody can't speak English, well, they shouldn't be here. And it
Mm,
kind of just ties into all that same rhetoric as well. But again, English is not the official language of the US. You would have to go through Congress to do that.
mhm. Okay, that makes sense to me. I think as to why that's the case.
But
Yeah,
we are we're going back and forth though as well on different things. I want to specifically let's speak about Ukraine just for a second,
yeah.
right? So obviously, with all the stories tied into that, and going back to obviously Russia, I think what is important to note is that people need to realize that Trump and his team have more in common with people like Putin than they do in many ways with European allies. They say obviously they stand for democracy, but they obviously don't, right? They're pushing the boundaries and defying the constitution already. They're already talking about Trump getting more time in power, and Putin himself, he's very anti-Muslim. He is anti-woke. They don't use that word there, but he does the similar rhetoric. Putin gets up and does speeches and jokes about how there are men in the streets dressed as women, and you see men kissing in the streets and all this type of stuff. People, children identifying as animals. He does all that same stuff in Russia. They have a lot in common, and it is obviously possible that we could see potentially the US and Russia potentially becoming closer over the next few years. We've already seen that he has directed, not the one of the departments, I can't remember which one, to look at which sanctions they can already start rolling back that they've put on Russia. Um, we don't know where this is going to descend to. There are people speculating that the US is going to, ally closer to Russia over the next few years because they do have a lot in common. They both want to expand. They're both anti-woke. They both see certain things as a threat to their civilization and the West, and so on and so on and so on. So who knows where it's going to go? People say that Trump's a Russian asset. There's evidence for it. There's a documentary about it. We've got his new, I can't remember her title, the director of joint intelligence or whatever it is it Nome, Christy Nome, who has been accused of being a Russian asset and has been declared by multiple intelligence agencies as a potential threat to national security. So we don't really know. All we can do is obviously wait, but ultimately Trump is seemingly handing Ukraine to Russia on a silver platter. That's the only way
It
I see
feels
it.
it feels it feels strange, for want of a better word. We've had the announcement as to stopping all military aid to Ukraine, and you know what? If it brings about peace and it brings that, then I'm in favour of anything that's going to help bring peace. But I don't see how removing that aid before any formal agreement has actually taken place is going to provide that. Because if Russia turn around tomorrow and say, stuff it, we're going to advance further, and Ukraine have suddenly not got the support that they had, then we're going to be in a situation where
Mm.
Russia are ahead. And I mean, I think it's fair some of the comments that have been made to Zelensky in terms of um, the fact that Ukraine have managed to keep up a good fight, for want of a better term, but they've done so with our support, with the support of the US. And I do think it's fair that without that support, they're going to struggle. But uh, I don't understand why the US now are so sort of set on this idea that well, they might just have to give up some of their lands, they might just have to face the fact that it's not theirs anymore and it belongs to Russia. Oh, and we're going to exploit you for all your minerals as well, and we're going to take all that, and then maybe we'll stop killing people and we'll come to an agreement to stop the invasion. Like,
Well, I was
Ukraine shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to give up the minerals resources. But I understand, if they want to do that and they're not using them and they want to do it for to bring about peace, I suppose. that's fairer than expecting them to give up land. But this idea that they still might, that's still being talked about, that they might have to accept the fact that Russia just now, that some of the land now just belongs to them. I just think it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. In fact, I agree with Julia Hartley Brewer on this. That's how ridiculous it's got. She was talking to Richard Tice about this not long ago, and she was like, if the UK had been invaded, how much land would you be happy to give up to Russia if Russia had invaded the UK? And this suggestion that Zelensky's just going to have to say, all right, then, there you go, Putin, have the land that you've invaded already, and we'll just sort of lie down with our legs in the air and give up. Oh, and by the way, here's all our minerals as well to the US.
But like another
It stinks. I don't like it.
like another part of this as well, which is frustrating, is that a lot of people are saying, well, if Trump gets peace, then ultimately that's good, right? And he should be praised for that, yada yada yada. But it's
But
almost been
Trump doesn't
framed.
want peace, though. He doesn't want peace. He wants minerals. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He's exploiting the war to get something. And to be honest, if America, and they're not going to put troops there, so we're going to have our troops on the ground in Ukraine, keeping the peace in inverted commas, while America have got people digging up the soil in order to extract minerals from the ground. If something kicks off or something happens, it's our troops that are on the ground that are going to have to respond, which could see a situation where we end up at war. All it takes is for one of those soldiers to fire a gun in the wrong direction, and it's World War III. Meanwhile, the US won't have any troops over there. So the US can turn around and say to Russia, well, it wasn't anything to do with us, it was those pesky Brits. And then what, where are we? All for what? So America can get some precious minerals out of the ground so that Musk can pop them on his next private space trip to Mars.
Well, yeah, obviously a lot of people have been speculating about that. Nothing's been agreed yet in terms of a security guarantee. We've got, Tusk, president, prime minister. Somebody will correct me in the comments. The leader of Poland, Donald Tusk, today saying, no, we're very confident we're going to get America over the line on this. They're going to be on our side. But then obviously we've got Macron yesterday saying, we need to be prepared for a future where the US isn't on our side. So again, it's just mixed messages everywhere. I also saw an article today in The Guardian, which was covering a committee hearing yesterday in Parliament, where a guy called, I think it was Lord Henning or Lord Hanning, was at a committee with former US ambassadors and other experts and so on. And he was basically saying something similar to Macron, that, we need to consider stopping sharing intelligence with the US. We need to consider that they might not be on our side in the future. This isn't just a simple policy change in this guy's opinion. This is an ideological change. This is a worldview change. And we may see a future soon where we may even be ideologically opposed to each other, which is obviously a dangerous path to go down. With the troops on the ground thing, hasn't been settled yet. I know some people, including myself, have different opinions on that. But where I was going to go is that what I found very frustrating, talking to probably maybe dozens of people personally, and obviously just seeing media pundits, yada, 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 saying, Trump's offering peace right now, that everyone should be taking it. Zelensky who wants to carry on this war, which again is ridiculous. As you mentioned earlier, he offered to resign for security guarantees, right? But again, what's frustrating is that this idea of Trump wanting to create peace so much, obviously it could be to favor Russia, whatever else, get the minerals. But also, I think it's to potentially buy him some credit. If he manages to get this in, there is a massive section of the public in multiple countries, especially in the US, who think this will allow Trump to become seen as a peacemaker. So when he's off, forcibly taking over the Panama Canal because China's infiltrated it, annexing Canada, or maybe taking Greenland, that they will think it's more justified because he has a good reason for it. Because of course, Trump's a peacemaker. So it's almost like buying him this cover that he actually only wants peace, and all the other things that he's doing is actually really, really necessary. But again, we don't know how those things are going to essentially go down, which is frustrating.
It's very frustrating, and I just feel that he is he's pandering to Putin because he wants Russia on side, because he's, like you said earlier, he's got lots of things in common with Putin. It's got nothing to do with peace at all. In fact, Vance, I'm sure it was Vance that was on a record literally saying the other day after the incident in the White House that he couldn't care less about the Ukrainians. They don't give a shit. They would quite happily sit back and watch Ukraine be completely wiped out and completely invaded by Russia. especially if it means that they can get some precious minerals out of the ground for, in return for it. And what I'm struggling with is this idea that Trump is supposed to be a peacekeeper. If Trump cared about peace, we wouldn't have seen the scenes that we saw in the White House in the Oval Office the other day. We wouldn't have seen them attacking Zelensky in the way that they did, regardless of political differences and personal views and opinions. If they genuinely cared about peace, they would not have carried out the outbursts that we saw in the Oval Office in front of the international press. And I mean, Trump tried to blame Zelensky for that, but it's very easy to sort of smile. I mean, Macron did it, right? We saw how Macron behaved when he was in the room with Trump. It was very clear that he thought he was an absolute prat, but he didn't have a big row. He didn't he just sat there silently and he smiled and he was polite and he was diplomatic. And with Zelensky, Trump and Vance were just like, "No, fuck this. We're just gonna make a right idiot of him in front of the press," which of course Putin's gonna be watching and absolutely pissing himself at. He will have seen that interaction and thought, "Oh, hey, this is great. These two are fighting, and the worst of the were apparently allies only a couple of months ago." So yeah, I really struggle with anyone that believes, if you think that what Trump is doing is because he wants peace. Honestly, I think you're either completely deluded, or you are just sympathetic to Russia and fascism and the way in which these two leaders make their decisions. Because from where I'm standing, it's about anything but peace. It's about what Trump can gain from it, and we've seen that in this idea around the minerals deal.
Mm. But I just want to bring it back as well, just for a moment, to an earlier point that we made as well, because I obviously brought a lot up. The US going behind Zelensky's back, speaking to politicians of the opposing parties to try and get them to find a way through the political process to essentially call an election and oust Zelensky. Apparently, part of the plan was to get Russia to call for a temporary ceasefire, and therefore they can declare they're not at wartime, trigger an immediate election, and then oust Zelensky. There's one little problem with that, Callum, and again, something they're obviously underestimating.
Well, there's a lot
Zelensky's
of
very
problems with that.
popular.
Yeah,
What's
he
that?
is. I'm just
Yeah,
saying there's a
Zelensky's
lot of
popular.
problems with that, but
He'd
yeah, he is.
probably win the election. So again, terrible plan,
But
upsetting
but
allies.
again, but again, going behind Ukraine's back, but also we saw that in the peace negotiations as well with the US, having negotiations with Russia without Ukraine's involvement about how to get to peace in a situation where Russia are the invaders and Ukraine are the invaded. So, again, I'm sorry to take it back to the previous point about Trump and peace, but if Trump actually cared about peace, he wouldn't be having conversations with Russia about how he gets to that point behind Ukraine's back. He wouldn't be plotting behind the scenes to get, to call for an election in Ukraine, especially when Zelensky has already said he would resign. He has already said if that's what it takes, he will step down. But it's also perfectly normal for a president or a prime minister or a leader of a country that is at war not to hold an election. It happened with Churchill during the war here.
It's in
What
their
happens is,
constitution, Callum.
do you know what I mean? Like, and it might be, and it might be normal for them, but it's also normal globally. It's a globally established system that many countries across the globe have, whereby if their country is at war and that war goes on longer than an election period, there is no election until the war is over, because you need to have stability. You need to have people leading the country, and cabinets leading the countries that can do so continuously over the period of the war, whether that's through a war cabinet, whether that's a cabinet that was in place beforehand, or whatever makeup that is. Holding an election during a war doesn't work. And okay, some people might argue, well, Trump's saying, that Russia need to get involved and call a ceasefire for an election to take place. But then if it's about peace, why is there a ceasefire simply for an election to take place? Because presumably that means once the election's over, there's a possibility of the war continuing after the ceasefire.
None of
There
that is
needs to
even
be an
that.
end of the war.
But none of that even matters anyway, because it would just be completely ridiculous. We have got millions of Ukrainians spread across dozens of different countries right now, all refugees. We've got people obviously on the front line. The reason why countries like America, people will say America never skipped their election, but when they were in war, that's because people may have been internally displaced, perhaps, but they weren't displaced outside of their own country. Right now, I think it's about
That's
10
true.
million Ukrainians are not within Ukraine right now, and obviously we've got people at different battlefronts all across Ukraine. It would be completely impractical to hold an election. It wouldn't be fair. Not everyone would be able to vote. It would be chaos. It just could not happen. And that's why in 2015, the Ukrainians changed their constitution. So if they go to war, there is no election.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
there is a way that it would work, and it would be that all the countries that have Ukrainian refugees would have to agree to essentially set up elections in those countries for Ukrainian citizens to go and
does
vote.
that
But I
sound
can't.
practical though? And that's the
Well,
part of the
I can't.
problem. Yeah.
I can't imagine Trump doing it, given he's threatening to take away asylum status from many Ukraine refugees in the
Mm.
states. So and it's also, like you say, it's also not practical, and it would cost. Presumably, it would be up to taxpayers in those countries to pay for it, which would be an absolute nightmare. But again, what else do we expect from Donald Trump? And I
Mm.
keep reminding myself for all the good that it does. Well, two things. Firstly, that we're only 2 months in, not even. Well, no, just over that now. But also, hopefully, we've got 4 years to go. Although,
Eh,
let's see what happens.
we'll see. Let's move on to a story that we can laugh about, hopefully a little bit more. Reform are in civil war. One of Nigel Farage's most prominent MPs, Rupert Lowe, please don't go follow this guy on Twitter. He just constantly pushes things like the great replacement theory and is even more hardline than Nigel Farage, if you haven't come across him too much yet. But has questioned his leader's messianic. Is that how you pronounce the word? Messianic? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the correct pronunciation. Basically, it means Messiah. That he's framed him as his leadership as he's a Messiah within the party, and that's how he's seen amongst the party and the members. And Rupert Lowe did an interview with the Daily Mail where he was calling for reform to be properly structured, but he said a lot worse than that. So Rupert Lowe, the MP for Great Yarmouth, was actually previously touted by Elon Musk as a potential replacement for Farage, if you remember in January when they had that spat online, and said that Farage would not make a good prime minister and he hasn't got the chops. And he actually then later that day, after that fallout happened, retweeted another tweet which said, actually, you know what? Rupert Lowe could actually make a good leader. And I kind of think all of this has gone to Rupert Lowe's head now. So in the interview with the Daily Mail, he said it's too early to know whether Nigel will deliver the goods. He says he has messianic qualities, but will they translate into sage leadership? I don't know. And then Lowe warned that the Reform UK needs to move beyond its reliance of Farage. He may leave before the next election. Who knows? He said that we have to change from being a protest party led by the Messiah into a structured party with a front bench. He said that Nigel must learn to delegate and not everything has to go through Nigel Farage. Quite scathing. Like most people aren't this open, especially in a really closed party of 5 MPs. Lowe's intervention actually follows lots of speculation over tensions from reform. Obviously, after Musk's remarks too, that he might be kind of making a play for leadership here. Obviously, Musk previously hinted at £100 million donation, but then later dismissed it. And then obviously went after Farage and said that he didn't have the chops to be leader, and then started praising Lowe instead. But Lowe obviously has quite significant grassroots. I said earlier that he's a bit more hardline than Nigel Farage, who's distanced himself from Tommy Robinson. But Rupert Lowe, not at all. He's quite sympathetic to Tommy Robinson, who obviously, unlike Farage, distanced the party from him. And again, going back in history, Nigel not supporting Tommy Robinson was ultimately what ousted him from the UKIP party too. But then later that day, after these remarks came out from the Daily Mail, Farage was on Talk TV taking questions, and people were asking him questions about the interview. And Farage said that, it kind of looks like he might want to be prime minister, and also said that he hopes hopes that he's going to be at the next election with reform, but with his tone, he might not be. So, are reform officially in civil war? Am I being a bit too dramatic? Or, guys, it's been 7 months. It's been 7 months. I thought they were going to last at least a little bit longer than this. But anyway, Callum, reform, civil war, Rupert Lowe, what do you think?
When have reform not been in civil war? Let's be realistic. We've had all the thing with Ben Habib. We've had all the thing with Farage coming along and ousting Tice without any say and taking over the leadership. Let's be clear. Reform UK is nothing without Nigel Farage. One of the reasons that they did so well in the general election is because Nigel Farage came along before the election and said, "Ha ha! I'm back. I said I was retiring." It's like, "Oh, peekaboo, I'm here all along." And everybody talked about it because Nigel Farage is the guy that the media write about all the time. Nigel Farage is the guy who blows his nose and it's front page of all the papers, right? Nigel Farage is the guy that's been invited more times than I think anybody else onto Question Time, although Richard Tice is on Question Time this evening. Nigel Farage is the guy who was the poster boy for the Brexit campaign. And also, Nigel Farage is the guy who, in some recent polling that I've seen in recent weeks, was deemed by the British public to be more favourable for Prime Minister than Keir Starmer. With as much as I can't stand the guy, his stance towards Tommy Robinson is actually a very good political decision to distance himself from Tommy Robinson, because if Reform want to appeal to more normal, normal, as if Reform voters are not normal. Reform voters are normal people. But, if Farage wants Reform to appeal to a wider range of voters, let's say, then he absolutely does the right thing to not support Tommy Robinson, because Tommy Robinson is a much more divisive figure than even Farage is. And I think there are some within Reform that don't understand that. And you know what? Great. If it means that they eat themselves alive and it all falls apart, I'm all for that. But if they actually want to do well, I can't see how they can do that without Farage, because he's the character. He's got the charisma. He's, unfortunately, among many, he's got the likability. He's got the ability to be able to stand in front of a TV camera and speak from the heart in a way that feels natural, normal. He made a big thing during the election campaign about the fact that everyone else needs a script and he doesn't need a script because he just speaks in common sense. He'd be absolutely disaster for the country. God help everybody and anybody if Reform formed a government and Farage was at the head of it. But if that's what they want to do, I don't see how they can do it without him. I really don't. And this whole Tommy Robinson thing, if the idea is to get rid of Farage and endorse Tommy, well, I'd like to see them do it, because, UKIP fell apart when Farage quit the party. And we know why. Tommy Robinson caused many problems within the, for supporters of the English Defence League. Where Tommy Robinson goes, disaster follows, and when Nigel Farage leaves, disaster follows.
What's interesting about all of this is that we know that Nigel Farage is just as right as Tommy Robinson and just as right as Rupert Lowe. It's about obviously how you control your image. But the image that Farage is trying to give off is that he's actually like of the left of Tommy Robinson, which is a weird thing to say. But if you actually like take a step back, if we think about this for a second, that means, Tommy Robinson is very much in line with people like Donald Trump, with the AFD, with all these far right parties. And Farage is actually trying to position himself on the left of all these right-wing figures, because obviously Musk is behind Tommy. Obviously, all these interconnected far-right parties who all network with each other, most of them about Tommy. There was a conservative conference in the UK a few weeks ago called the ARC Conference, and Tommy Robinson was mentioned there multiple times. There was multiple far-right figures there from around the world. And what a weird world to live in, where we're now living in a world where we're talking about who's on the left and the right of people like Farage and Tommy Robinson. It's quite odd. I think what's also interesting out of all of this is that obviously within the last week, Keir Starmer's got a massive bump in his approval rating. We're still waiting for more data to come out because of his handling of Ukraine and everything that's going on there. And obviously, it's debatable amongst lots of people whether he's actually done a good job. But regardless of that, the perception is that he's done a good job. That's what many people in the public feel, and it's giving him a boost. And then, obviously, added with the Reform Party infighting, it's almost like a double blow for Farage. So it'll be interesting to see some polling, perhaps in a few weeks, to see how all of this goes down. And again, like Reform have been pretty silent on like the Ukraine issue. They've been asked questions about it in public, but almost kind of, distance themselves from it, while, everybody is constantly talking about, Ukraine in the US and Europe. Farage is just on Twitter talking about immigrants, which again, interesting. He's not really finding a way to kind of steal the limelight right now. He's struggling. And now the only limelight that he's getting is that Reform are fighting amongst each other. And we're only 7 months in.
It'll be interesting to see how Tice performs tonight on Question Time as well, I think, because obviously I imagine that, Ukraine will probably come up. I imagine there'll be a question about Trump. I mean, I'm guessing here, but just thinking of what's gone on in the last week or so, there's certainly going to be a question about one or the other, I would imagine. And it will be very interesting to see how he performs, there on those issues.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if they bring up the infighting. That'll be Ukraine will obviously come up, and the infighting. And by the way, we're not going to the comments just yet, but I'm just curious. Actually, I want to ask everybody a question in regards to what I was saying about Keir Starmer's approval. How have all you guys actually felt over the last week or so about Keir Starmer, about how he's doing, how other people think he's doing? This change in perception. People are saying that he looks more competent. He looks more like a leader. He's done a good job. I don't want to debate that right now. I'm just curious how you guys who are watching right now actually think of that, and put it in the comments, and then me and Callum can discuss it in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay,
but
if we're
Callum,
discussing it in a few minutes, I'll hold my thought then.
well, no, yeah, yeah, we can come back to it. But I think again, what is interesting is obviously Farage doesn't want to fully democratize the party, despite him trying to give the perception of that, because ultimately he got ousted from UKIP because of Tommy Robinson, because it was a more democratized party. I don't know the exact structure of
But
it.
look at what happened to UKIP, though. Like this is what I mean. If and I'm delighted that Reform are fighting amongst themselves again. If it means that they fall apart, brilliant. But if Reform want to be successful as a political party moving forward, they need to learn from what's gone on before. And when Farage was ousted from UKIP, what happened to UKIP? There are still people today. In fact, some of them have been at Tommy Robinson's marches, where people from within UKIP who are still getting on stages saying you need to vote UKIP and don't vote Reform because Reform are just con men, and which is true, and and UKIP are the way forward. And like, who votes for UKIP nowadays? Like, it's a very small number of people, and Reform will
Have
go the
you
same way.
have you spoken about your interaction with a certain person?
No, I haven't. I
You
haven't.
haven't.
I decided not to show the video either. Why? But we can talk about it. Go on.
So, guys, a few weeks ago when we were interviewing Carla Denyer, I was on the way to Parliament, and Callum and Curtis were on the tube. What tube were you on? You on Elizabeth Line? Do you remember?
No idea. It was the one that stops at Westminster. I know that
Bloody
much.
Northerners. Anyway, guess who was on the tube with them? Mr. Richard Tice. Callum, what did you do?
Well, the long story, the short story. Basically this was the day after, just for context, because I know the Carla interview's only just gone up, but we filmed that the day after Reform had held a press conference essentially saying that they were waging war on net zero. And Curtis had done a bit of digging and had noticed and had tweeted about the fact that Richard Tice is the chief executive of a company which had been investing heavily. It's like property refurbs, but they'd been investing heavily in renewable energy and solar panels specifically, and electric car charging ports. And obviously he's making money from this. And we were just interested, and Curtis had tweeted about it earlier in the day, and we were just interested as to how, about the hypocrisy that exists within this. The night before is, on the one hand, he's calling out net zero, saying it's all a scam and we need to stop investing in it. But he's making personal profits
So
from
what did you do, Callum?
investing in fossil fuels. Well, I just approached him, didn't I? I got the phone out, I got the microphone out. I waited until we were off the tube. I could have done it there and then, but I thought that would have been unfair. So I waited until we were off the tube, and I just approached him. And I think I went in all guns blazing. I think the first thing I said to him was, I said, Mr. Tice, I said, are you a hypocrite? And he sort of looked at me and he sort of laughed and then was like, who are you? Who are you? Anyway, and I started trying to quiz him about the fact, about what I've just mentioned. And he wasn't very happy. He was upset that he'd been doorstepped, as the words that he used. He was upset that, he didn't know who we were. He's like, who are you? Where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from Turn Left Media. No one's heard of you. No one's ever heard of you. Who even are you? Who even are you? It was like being at a football match. Who are you? You know. So he wasn't very happy. To be fair, he did sort of engage, a little bit. He sort of spoke to me back and forth a little bit. We got on the escalators. The conversation continued, and then Curtis, after Curtis caught up, because I just sort of ran ahead. And to be fair, Becca's saying
With his
a good
massive suitcase that he was
just
hauling around London.
just to say though, but Becca's saying a good journalist, Cal. To be fair, I hold my hands up. I wasn't a good journalist in that moment. I turned into an activist and I went in all guns blazing. Curtis, on the other hand, phenomenal journalist. Well, just, Mr. Tice, I'm just a little bit confused as to the hypocrisy, in the way in which. And before we'd even had a chance to finish his sentence, Richard Tice turned around. You're either confused or you're thick. Which was very polite of him. So obviously Curtis was, there's no need to be rude, but Curtis was very, very polite and very, very journalistic in his performance. I was just like, you're a hypocrite. But it wasn't particularly pleasant. But what was really interesting about that interaction, what I thought was really interesting about that interaction was just before, and well, he asked us, he said, why didn't you come to the press conference last night? As if, why didn't you write to our press secretary and come to the press conference? As if we did that, he's gonna let Turn Left Media come to a Reform UK press conference. We should try it. We should get in contact with his team and see next time they do one, see whether we can get somebody in, because I'd be very surprised if they allowed a media for socialism in their
But
space.
guys,
But
this is what you're.
point being, well, sorry, I was just going to say, point being, though, he wouldn't answer the question. And actually, if you're profiteering from something that you're publicly saying is bad, but you're making money from it, and people are doorstepping you in the street, whether or not they've got a camera and a microphone in your face or not, surely, if you're a man of principle, you would be able to answer that question. Surely he would have been able to confidently say, well, actually, these are the facts. And even if he thought we got it wrong, these are the facts. This is the situation. And yeah, I am benefiting financially, but this is why it's a problem. And if he'd have been able to do that, I would have had maybe an ounce of respect for him. But just quickly, something that I thought was really interesting about this interaction was just before he left and he walked off and he said, right, that's it. I'm not interested in you anymore. And he marched off up the escalators. There was a member of the public, just a random woman that was stood next to us. He sort of looked at her, rolled his eyes as we were talking to him, and she smiled and responded back with something along the lines of, you're doing a great job, Mr. Tice. Keep up the great work. And that, I thought, that surprised me. I mean, what's the chances that when we bump into him, we're going to be, one of the people that are going to just random people we're going to be stood next to is going to be someone that actually supports him and thinks that what he's doing is great. And I mean, she might have just been doing that to appease him because of the situation, but she obviously knew who he was. And if one woman on the tube in the tube station that happened to be stood next to us thinks he's doing a good job, I think she's reflective of many people up and down the country that do think that Reform are doing a good job. But go on. You wanted to?
No, I was just going to say, and just to add to the story of Richard Tice having investments in green energy, there was a story that came out within the same day showing that Rupert Lowe himself also had, I can't remember the full story, it was something to do with solar panels on one of his buildings or homes, and he's benefited massively from that in energy saving costs within the same 24 hours of the Reform Party saying that they were going to tax companies who receive subsidies from for the green energy sector to bring back people's taxes and give it back to them because net zero is a joke, but they're all invested in green energy and benefiting from it too. The hypocrisy, Reform,
Yeah.
never.
And just quickly on a cheeky nod to Turn Left, of course. Something that was brilliant was obviously his "Who are you? Nobody's ever heard of you." Well, when we arrived in Westminster and we went through all the insane security at Portcullis House, one of the first things that Carla's press secretary, I think it was a media secretary that we met with, wasn't it? One of the first things that she said was, "Oh yeah, Carla's heard you. She's seen some of your content. You know, we all know who you are." So it's like, well, they know who we are. So people have heard of us. He was just being a bit of a
And just
dick.
remember, guys,
But,
though,
but
if
to
you
be
want
fair,
to,
I did accost him at Westminster Tube Station. In fairness, so.
and if you want to continue supporting our work of chasing Reform MPs around London and harassing them into whatever question we're going to throw at them,
No, it
please
wasn't. It wasn't
support us,
harassment.
guys.
It wasn't harassment. It wasn't harassment. It was firm accosting, if that's any
If you
better
would
word
like
to
us
use.
to chase Reform MPs around London and be activists and journalists, how about that? You can support us as well, guys. Obviously, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to give us a one-off donation. Perhaps if you are feeling generous, you can gift some memberships in the chat too. We've had some really amazing people gifting memberships in the chat on YouTube over the last few weeks. So thank you for those. And of course, just make sure you're doing all the usual stuff, liking the video, sharing all that lovely stuff that I hate advertising because it feels cheesy. And just
Jacqueline, sorry.
obviously continue.
No, it's just saw Jacqueline's comment. She just said Curtis should have said, "Don't you recognise me from GB News?" I am interested, though, genuinely interested. If you just in terms of like the journalism activism thing, you know, what would you in terms of content like that? What would you like to see from us? Would you like to see us if we are in situations where there's, you know, we've got you know, MPs and people like Richard Tice? Do you want to see us interviewing them in a more sort of activist way, or would you like to see us be more polite and more? Because I think sometimes you can approach somebody and you can interview them in a way that's very polite and very sort of journalistic. But I think also there are some people who like you need to just call out the bullshit, and I think Tice is one of them. But I'd be interested to know what the viewers think of that. Sorry, I'm derailing our plug.
No problem at all. I'll just make sure that any donations that we get, we'll spend it on milkshakes. Way! I do not condone any violence towards politicians. People have been arrested for that. We are going to move on to comments, though. So if we can go to the comments, we've got some starred. Cog, are you coming on to talk in the background of the comments?
Yes. Am I audible to you two at the very least?
You are very audible.
We can hear you. Yes, I don't know whether they can, but we can.
Excellent. If people in the chat could just confirm that you can hear me, I'm going to assume that you can for now. But okay, so first of all, we have this comment from Jacqueline during the early Ukraine-US section. Okay, the UK doesn't have the best record considering its colonial past and its former empire, but that's a bit rich coming from the US. Any commentary on what's been said about the UK?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah. Obviously, there's been a lot of hypocrisy around the conversation around Ukraine and the West and its allies, right? And a lot of that hypocrisy comes from not just our past, but our present. You know, we're in a situation where I would like to say all of us are supporting, obviously, the Palestinian cause. They are losing land and homes and lives every single day, and we're supporting that. Our government is supporting that. Our allies are supporting that, and the US is supporting that. And we're out here saying, give them their land back, give them their lives back, give them their prisoners back, give them a state. And then at the same time, we're telling Russia that they need to give their land back to Ukraine, while also telling Ukraine maybe you have to give some of it up. There's so much layered hypocrisy in all of this in terms of our Western stance, and this is what's making us weak. Our past makes us weak, our colonial past, and the actions that we take now. Everything from the Iraq War to our continued support of Israel, when we actually finally stand up for something that I believe is right, which is supporting Ukraine against Russian expansionism, we look like fucking hypocrites. We look like absolute fucking hypocrites. What leg do we have to stand on to say that this one is the right one that we should be standing for? And people are just laughing at us.
I agree.
Any more
I can't add to that. No, I can't add to it. I mean, I don't know if Cog's got anything like to add on that, but I just think that, you know, it is. I mean, Jacqueline's right. You know, it is a bit rich coming from the US. You know, we've got pubs in this country that are older than the United States in its current form, and actually, it was only, you know, even a well, yeah, even 100 years ago, when they were still committing a genocide against Native Americans. So, I think it's the states haven't really got a leg to stand on. But I do think that in terms of the wider discussions around Ukraine and our involvements and the West's in general's involvement, I'm concerned that there's suddenly a shift in support towards Russia. I have seen and I have heard it, particularly even on the left as well. I have seen a lot of people making excuses for Putin, making excuses for the invasion of Ukraine, trying to somehow justify it, and aligning themselves very much with the rhetoric of Donald Trump and his allies. And I think it's dangerous, and I think that it's a concern that the rest of Europe needs to certainly at least have their eyes open for and keep their eyes open.
And again, like, we continue to do bad things all around the world, and if we truly want to be a state which stands up for the right thing, then we need to be consistent with what we believe in. We need to be consistent. When we've got, David Lammy in 2021 voting that there is a genocide going on in China against the Uyghurs, and then a few years later shaking the hands of the leaders in China, right? Again, it's complete hypocrisy. There's no consistency. We don't really have a leg to stand on, other than the objective fact that I know it's right to support Ukraine, but ultimately, from an international stage, we are a bit of a laughingstock. And
we're better than the US, though.
As well.
And actually, in terms of what we were talking about, in terms of people's opinions of Starmer, I think I'll make this point now. Actually, it was the one that I was supposed to come back to. I think that next to Trump, any political leader looks statesman-like, and I think one of the statesman-like, and I think one of the reasons possibly that it appears that there's a bit more support for Starmer now, particularly around this Ukraine issue. It's not because Starmer's doing a particularly great job, but it's because in comparison to Trump, he's very much doing a better job. And the whole bending the knee and groveling around the whole state visit thing, which is just completely insane. And I still stand by what I said, that he needs to revoke that invitation to Trump immediately as a direct result of the way that Trump behaved. It's not going to happen, but
I think it'll happen.
I think
Ben, would you do me a quick favor? Would you put up Rachel's last comment? Oh no, sorry, the one at 9/11 about tankies. 9/11 at tankies. That's a weird combination. I just wanted to quickly bring this up. I am so fucking fed up of tankies. I do not have time for you at all. If you're out there thinking that Russia is actually the good guy and we're the aggressor in this situation, we are the aggressor in many situations, right? You don't have to go so far down the idea of like, yes, the West is bad, that somehow anyone who opposes is therefore good. And this idea of Russia actually being the good guy, and some tankies even going as far to say that, actually, it's a democracy in Russia. I was talking to a fucking tanky the other day who was literally saying that North Korea is actually borderline utopian and everyone's really happy there. In actual fact, they actually elect Kim Jong-un into his position every time there's an election, and it's fair, and they're very happy there. It's very frustrating that we live in a world where these people exist. We can be critical of the West. You can support, communism if you're one of those type of tankies. We've got the right-wing tankies and the left-wing tankies, but ultimately, you still need to be able to critique those countries too and call them out for what they are, the same way we need to call out the West for what they are too. I don't have time for it. But I am just on an absolute tanky rage right now over the last few days, because I've met too many people who they've gone down the left-wing tanky aisle, they've gone down the right-wing tanky aisle of the people who are basically eating up things that Trump is saying, that Ukraine started the war, that Zelensky's a dictator, Putin is just, saving his country, fighting against the aggressive NATO, which obviously there is a lot of truth in that statement about NATO not being the good guys, right? There can be truth in that. But the fact that this is spreading, that we're making multiple reform voters and Tommy supporters who are all saying the same shit as left-wing tankies, that Putin's the good guy, it's ridiculous.
It's
have a
really funny,
reality check.
actually. It's really funny, actually, because Putin in his initial speech, where his initial "Why I'm invading Ukraine" speech, as well as bringing up J.K. Rowling, the other thing he was saying was how awful the Soviet Union was. Like, these people do not like. Russia is not currently a communist country. Like, you guys can stop like doing the rounds for Putin. You can stop leaping forward like that meme of Apu jumping in front of the gun for Putin. You don't have to be doing that. Yeah, sorry. Just I'm gonna move on to a couple of comments. We've got a few to get through. Graham,
We've got one last quick story as well, which we'll try and get through quickly.
oh, okay, yep. Graham.
Oh no, not now. I mean, we'll do some comments first.
Yep, yeah. Graham said, "Would it even be a normal island live stream without technical issues?"
And it
And
wasn't
I
our
just had to
fault,
put that up.
I was going to say it wasn't our fault on this occasion.
It's so
in
correct.
fairness. And actually, the technical issues that we've had over recent shows have in part been caused by the problem that we've had tonight. That's not our fault.
Mm.
It's the stream. It's essentially the streaming software, guys. We have lots of issues with it. We've been moving around to different ones to try and get it perfect, and hopefully we'll get there. We'll get there with patience and hopefully your support. We apologize.
It's fine. One day we'll have our own TV channel to rival GB News, so it'll be fine.
What do you mean rival? It'll be much bigger than GB News.
Right.
So Graham's also said, "Do we actually think the prospect of the USA not supporting Trident is credible?" I was definitely not expecting that one when I read it, and I wanted to bring this one up because I think it's a really interesting question.
I think absolutely anything that comes out of the US right now is credible. Trump is so unpredictable that he could walk out of the Oval Office tomorrow and the entire world will just change. Like I would not put anything past him and his team. So, is it what impact would that have is a different question. Is the idea of them doing that credible? I think personally, we can't underestimate anything from this Trump term.
And obviously, people can argue about whether they're, pro Trident, against Trident, impartial on it. I think that's a different argument to what we're talking about now. It's about the instability that Trump is causing through his moves. If you are, if you're against Trident and you want to see it gone, perhaps you might see this and be happy, but don't be, because it's about the instability that it's going to cause. If you want to get rid of Trident, you want to do it on good terms and not these types of terms. It does cost the UK taxpayer £3 billion a year. It's a very expensive program. You never really can actually measure how effective it is. France is not in Trident. They didn't trust America with a connection to their nuclear weapons, especially after America didn't back them during the Suez Canal crisis. So that's why France has got its whole own thing going on. I'm
not against scrapping Trident. I'm not against it, but like you said, Lewis, it needs to be done on good terms. It needs to be a conversation where world leaders sit around and they discuss it and they talk about it, rather than just one throwing his fucking toys out the pram because he's lost his fucking mind.
Oh, sorry, I was reading a comment.
Sorry, no, it's fine. That's all I had to say on that.
What else do we have, Cog?
Yeah, of course. So I think this was an interesting comment, because this creates a space for independent European foreign policy, because this is linked to the Trident thing, because I was going to ask whether you guys think that having Trident independent from the USA, if you're going to have a Trident nuclear missile system, is it worth having it independent from the USA? And this sort of links to this idea that actually independence from the USA, not entirely a bad thing. And I think I agree with Jung's in the sense that it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that it is being done definitely makes it a bad thing, right? I don't entirely agree with the comment in that sense. So they've said this creates a space for independent European foreign policy, which could divorce itself from America if Europe has the will. Not a bad thing. But I think I'm in the same place as you guys, not this way.
I think it's a bad thing when Trump is the president, because any animosity any formal breakdown of unions, of agreements, of friendship, of allyship between Europe and America opens the doors for a Trump-Putin, coalition of chaos, to coin a phrase. And I genuinely believe that let me rephrase that. I genuinely believe that if Trump's term ends in 4 years and he's replaced with a Democrat
Big if.
or somebody else that's not a big Trump supporter and a MAGA cult crazy, or if it's 10, 15 years down the line, whatever. But I do believe that when we eventually, and it will happen eventually, get to the point where the US elects somebody who's, at best even simply just a corrupt politician rather than a fucking narcissistic piece of shit. I can't think of anything else a nicer way of a more polite way of describing him right now. I do think that America will immediately go back and rekindle those problems and rebuild those friendships and those allyships with the country that it's broken down. What concerns me at the moment is that if we celebrate too much being independent from the US, we don't know how Trump's going to react to that, and we don't know if that's going to come back and bite us on the arse. And I think that we need to, like Macron says, I think we need to be prepared for a situation where where we can't rely on the US. But I think, like we've already said, it needs to happen in as diplomatic a way as possible, where it doesn't give Trump more ammunition to say, fuck you, let's just invade everywhere else. I mean, he's genuinely talked about invading Greenland and invading Canada, and he's talked about, taking back the Panama Canal and all these other big ideas that he's got. Musk's posed the idea on Twitter that the US come over to the UK and they liberate all the British people from the horrible left-wing woke communist Keir Starmer government that we apparently have. We need to be tough, and we need to call out the bullshit. But I think we also need to be very careful. And I think with the US under any other leader, being more independent from them, I don't think will be a bad thing, because we'd still have some support. But when Trump's in charge, as much as I don't want to be associated with him, I think we have to have to be careful how we approach it. Definitely.
I think we need to take everything that was coming at us as an opportunity right now, despite the things that might come out of it, which are negative. I think we have been too connected to the US for a long time, that's negatively influenced us. I don't want to obfuscate any responsibility for the bad things that we have done, but ultimately we have been dragged, influenced, and pushed into doing things we might not have done if it wasn't for the US's constant hand around our throat. And again, I'm not trying to push any responsibility just on the US. We participated in a lot of bad things, but I would like to hope, maybe perhaps naively, that if we were able to disconnect ourselves from the US, when I say permanently, I don't mean like, never speak to them again. I just mean militarily, even.
But do you agree with me that
we could perhaps move to a better future, perhaps in Europe? Who knows? Am I being naive?
Do you agree with me that needs to be done in a way that's not harmful? Because, like I say, what concerns me is that we're just going to say fuck you to Trump, and Trump's going to get arsey about it. Because if it's not his decision, he's going to be upset that we've made that decision. And it's
obviously I would rather it be done in a non-harmful way, but anytime it's not, whatever way it comes, we need to take it as an opportunity to disconnect ourselves from the US. When I'm not going to again push any responsibility away from our current government and our previous governments for their support of Israel, but what we do know is that at every step in our support for Israel, it has been the US pushing us, and sometimes, according to some reporting, threatening us if we don't do things that they want. So I'm fed up of that. I don't want that to be our reality. I would like to hope that in the future, if a better government comes in, that they wouldn't have to do it under the global police military state that the US has over its allies and its 40 bases in Europe and its 100,000 soldiers that they have here. If they want to get rid of that, let's get rid of it and
Do
take
you
it as an
think that?
opportunity.
Do you think that opens the door to more adversary from Trump, though? Because, like, I agree with you. I think some of the things that America have dragged us into in the past are awful. Not that we shouldn't take responsibility for our own involvement in those things, but equally, we with the way that Trump's mind works, I don't think we should be kneeling down and and going out begging like Starmer did the other day. But there is a part of me that thinks, for the sake of national security, that we need to be careful with how we approach it.
Oh, yeah, we
And I,
definitely need to be careful. All I'm saying is like we just need to essentially accept whatever happens. Like we can obviously try and fight for whatever security we can in the meantime, and perhaps win some fights here and lose some there. But essentially, whatever happens,
I
we
think
can't
if
just see it as a loss. We just need to see it as an opportunity for change.
Yeah, but I think if Trump turns around and basically says, "Look, that special relationship is gone. Deal with your own shit." I think that's different, though, to us. There was a lot of talk in Parliament the other week about, should we? Starmer saying, "Oh, are you saying that we have to choose between our allies in Europe and our allies in America?" And while I think we absolutely need to be calling out this Trump administration, if that is the choice, I think it's better for us if Trump makes that decision than if we do. If we turn around
Oh,
to Trump
yeah.
and say, "Fuck you, we're gonna have closer ties to Europe, and we're just gonna be independent from you completely," and that comes from us, I think that sets us up for Trump to come down on us like a ton of bricks. Whereas if Trump makes that decision, I feel like we'll come off better for it.
I feel like I kind of
Potentially.
disagree.
Go on.
I feel like I kind of disagree because I think that actually the way that Trump operates is he doesn't. First of all, he will go for anyone at any time. Like Canada has been nothing but polite. In fact, the Canadians are like
Famous.
famously like they're known for being very polite to the Americans. Like that is their thing. And he's still threatening them with invasion. Like I don't think you get out of Trump's Trump's ire by being polite to him. I actually think sometimes if you show a bit of force, he knows to take you seriously. And actually, I think there is an element of Trump is just a coward at the end of the day. Like any state that could genuinely threaten him, he like cozies up to their leader and says how great they are. Like any state that like actually genuinely poses a threat to him, with the possible exception of Iran, like every other state, China, North Korea, Russia, literally any state that would possibly pose a genuine threat, and he is just like avoiding saying anything bad about their leadership. I think sometimes you've got to give him a bit of. I think genuinely, Zelensky might have come out with a better deal if he had turned around in the White House when JD Vance and Trump turned on him, turned around in the White House and gone, well, you guys can waste your time. Actually, I think that you're a draft dodger and a coward, Donald Trump. And I think that I turn around to the media and say, if you're serious about supporting democracy in the Western world, then come and join us. But until that happens, I'm leaving America to go and speak to my allies in Europe. And once these cowards catch up with us, then we can talk. And then walk out of there, because then when you come back to the negotiating table, you're doing it from a position of, okay, I've shown that I'll stand up to you. So any deal that we now do looks extra good, right? Any deal that we can now do looks extra good. If I'm suddenly talking nicely about you, it means that much more. I think you've got to be quite harsh with Trump in order to get anywhere.
Yeah, you've swayed me, Cog.
I am going to have to. I am going to have to jump to the last story because we are 20 minutes over, and I know people have probably got things to do this evening.
Is there a couple of? Is it right if I bring in just a couple more comments?
Okay, but let's try and reduce the commentary.
Yeah, go on.
The last story.
Okay, I think that's quite important. So first of all, some guy I think I've seen on GB News says if there's peace, great.
Block him.
I don't know. He seems familiar, but I'm not sure
Look
from
at
where.
that hair.
I know. I'd happily praise Trump for that. But do you think Trump is actually in favor of peace? Of course not. Which echoes kind of. I think we're kind of in agreement on this, but I don't think thinking that Trump is after peace or quiet, I would term it, rather than peace, is a bad
I don't.
position. To be
I'm
honest.
going to push back on our lovely friend Curtis and say I wouldn't praise him for it. If he turned around and got a security guarantee, obviously Zelensky is unfortunately in this situation probably going to have to potentially give up some land. I don't know what that would look like, whether it's the mineral deal, whatever it might be. If Zelensky gets what he's been asking for, then yeah, maybe I'll be like, okay, a little tiny bit of praise there. But ultimately, if Trump secures peace under terrible conditions, which is going to set Ukraine up for failure in the future, I wouldn't praise him. I would not praise him at all because it's just going to cause more harm down the future. And he's obviously just doing it for himself. But again, as Curtis says at the thing, do you actually think he's in favor of peace? Of course not, which I agree with too.
If it leads to
Okay.
less people being killed, then that's a good thing, right?
I'm gonna just a couple of comments I just want to push back on. So Mark said that the war in Ukraine is a direct result of NATO desire to expand. The coup in Ukraine was funded by the USA. Okay, so just a couple of things about Viktor Yanukovych and the coup. So Viktor Yanukovych was president back in 2013, 2014 when all of this occurred. And Ukraine's parliament voted overwhelmingly for closer ties with the European Union, specifically the EU-UK Association
Unanimously,
Agreement.
actually. It was unanimously. Every
Was it
single person
unanimous?
voted for
Okay,
it.
I thought
It
I
was
thought it said
unanimous.
overwhelming, but as unanimous. And instead, Yanukovych chose to go to closer ties with Russia. But the reason that this whole narrative of it was just the USA doesn't work is there's a couple of snags in that argument. First of all, in November 2013, before the Euromaidan protests, Yanukovych claimed that Putin was already threatening him with invasion if he signed the deal. If he signed the deal with the European Union, so Yanukovych actually said that Putin was already threatening to annex Crimea and southern Ukraine if he signed the deal with the European Union. Right? That's not the USA instituting a coup. That's Yanukovych himself saying that that he was being threatened by Russia, and the
Which
USA
breaks the
also.
Budapest Memorandum.
Yes, yeah, very good point. The USA also wanted Yanukovych to stay in office as interim leader after the Euromaidan protest. The USA argued for him to remain in office, and the Euromaidan protesters were the ones who decided to push him out. Like the US ambassador wanted Yanukovych to remain in place, and of course there's also the question of, like, along with these closer ties with Russia came the anti-protest laws, and in the clashes 100 protesters were killed, 13 police were killed, but 100 protesters were killed. I can't see that as like the USA intervening to like coup the government of Ukraine. That's like a misreading of the situation in my view. Do you guys want to add anything on the whole?
It goes back to the tanky thing that I was talking about earlier. I've met so many, it's more the right-wing tankies who are pushing this idea that it was a coup. It wasn't a coup. You can simply very easily look into it. Of course, there's like Western influence in terms of them wanting to welcome Ukraine into the European and Western sphere, but there was no like direct influence in terms of like threats or any sort of like direct pressure in terms of what Russia was actually putting on the state of Ukraine. And ultimately, any person who's saying that this was a coup, it's not a coup. There's no evidence of that in any way. There's one random like phone call that got released between a mid-level minister in the Ukrainian government and some US government person, which is a conversation of them talking about who would make a good replacement for a future leader of Ukraine. And people have taken that as a conversation of the US trying to institute a coup against the Ukrainian government. But you can actually go and read the transcript of that call, which is them just discussing who would be best for the future. And they say, how about this person? And they're like, no, they have this problem, yada, yada, yada. And they kind of just like doing a process of elimination, just kind of talking it out a little bit. Turns out that call was leaked by a Russian minister. And that's how the call came about. It was just put out there by Russia, edited in special ways, probably to make it look like, again, there was US direct influence in the removal of Yanukovych. it's just, again, just more Russian propaganda, which adds to all of this. And it's frustrating because it eats away at this conversation. It sows seeds of discourse within the rhetoric around this. And it's very, very frustrating. The Ukrainian people chose a different direction. The parliament voted, I actually literally have the number here. In the afternoon, the Rada voted 328-2-0 to remove Yanukovych from his post and to schedule an early presidential election on the 25th of May.
Sorry, this is that's the vote to remove Yanukovych. Sorry, that was overwhelming. I think the support for the EU Ukraine association agreement was wasn't unanimous, but was overwhelming. That was the vote I was talking about. Sorry, Callum, did you want to jump in on that one?
I've got nothing of value to add to that conversation.
Okay, just one more comment. Just wanted to respond to absolute last one. I promise, Lewis. I'm so sorry.
Why are you bringing up all the conspiracy theories today?
We need to respond. So another Mark says, Trump knows the EU is a WEF surf organization, and leaders like Trudeau and Starmer are 100% WEF affiliates. By the way, that's World Economic Forum. Trump hates WEF. Just this is a really ironic time to do this because literally 11 days ago, Trump was speaking at the World Economic Forum. Like this, literally 11 days ago, Trump was at the World Economic Forum because it's full of capitalists.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else, Ben. I thought you were going to say another more recent story. BlackRock just bought the Panama, the port in Panama. They just took a massive investment into the Panama Canal and its infrastructure through the direction and pushing of Donald J. Trump. Again, BlackRock ties into the whole, global order, WEF stuff. It's hilarious, but they don't care, Ben. They don't care. They just don't pay attention to these things.
Oh, people get wildly conspiratorial about the World Economic Forum. Essentially, all it is it's a forum of capitalists. But because they say things like the classic one is that you'll own nothing and be happy, which is just describing like renting stuff, which of course capitalists love to do to you. Because if you have to rent everything, then or pay a monthly subscription for everything, then you don't own anything, and they want you to be happy about that. But that's just describing capitalism. That's not like a conspiracy theory of like global elites. Do you know what I mean? Or I suppose it is global elites, but not in the sense that they mean. It's
just a little party for them all, isn't it, Cog? They just enjoy, coming together and doing whatever strange things it is that they do while celebrating how much money they've all got. Do you have any more conspiracy theories there? Was that the last one?
That's the last one.
We're going to have to very quickly do the last story.
Cool.
All right. People are all right, aren't they? Or do you need to go?
Well, no, it's not just that. It's just that obviously I know people want to see the end of the show, but some people might not be able to due to their schedules. So we want to give them the stories that we've got for them.
That's true.
Okay, so last story. I'll be interested to hear people's opinions on this actually in the comments. We may even look at some more because it is an interesting topic. So the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has ordered a review of the Sentencing Council's powers after claims that the new guidelines discriminate against white men. That's how many people are phrasing it. The Council's updated rules, set to take effect in April, recommend that judges consider an offender's ethnicity or faith when deciding jail sentences. Mahmood wrote to the Council's chair, Lord Justice Davis, expressing her displeasure and urging a reconsideration. She argued that while the pre-sentence report provides a useful context and access to them, that they should not be that access to them should not be determined by an offender's ethnicity, culture, or religion. She also announced a broader review of the Council's role and warned she would introduce legislation if necessary. And the guidelines aim to tackle bias and reduce reoffending by increasing the use of pre-sentence reports for ethnic minorities, young adults, abuse survivors, and pregnant women. Critics include, obviously, the one and only Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick, the conservative king of the culture wars, claims this creates a two-tier system. They love that word. The previous Conservative government consulted on the changes but did not actually intervene. Ah, who would have believed? Labour's intervention is seen as an appeal to the right leaning voters. Meanwhile, ministers have emphasised their opposition to the guidelines, which also seek to reduce the imprisonment of pregnant women. And then in 2023/2024, 215 pregnant women were in English prisons, with 53 babies born in custody. One thing I actually didn't know until very recently is that if you do give birth in prison, there are facilities where you can stay with your baby. There is some interesting topics and discussions around this. So, Callum, we do only have limited time, but with this information, what do you think about this idea of potentially, giving people reduced sentence based off of their background? Problematic or something worthwhile, or perhaps good intention but maybe misguided?
I think it's the latter. I think it might be good intentions but misguided. We know that people from certain minority ethnic backgrounds, for example, are more likely to end up in situations where they're arrested, where they're stopped and searched. We also know that statistically, a lot of the time, Black and ethnic minority individuals are more likely to get harsher sentences than the white counterparts. Like, we've seen evidence of that happening, and I imagine that it's probably something to do with that they're trying to sort of take into account. But on the flip side of that, and to take it to an extreme example, it wasn't that long ago that you and I were having conversations with individuals who believe that the Southport killer should have had a lesser sentence because he was also the victim of racism. And I worry that if we are saying that simply because you're from a particular background, that we're going to consider maybe giving you a lighter sentence, I do think that's problematic because, you know, bad people that do bad things are bad people, regardless of the color of their skin or what religion they practice. Now, I get it a bit more with the pregnant women thing, because I can't
Mm,
imagine that giving birth in a prison, whether there's facilities there for that to happen and for the baby to be or not, I can't imagine that is healthy for either the mother or for the child. And I'm sure that there are, I'm not a medical professional, but I would imagine there are huge disadvantages health-wise for the health of the baby, not only being born in a prison, but then being separated from the mother, even though there's facilities for them to be together.
mm,
It's just not an environment that you'd want to be, bringing a child into the world in. Like, I get that, but for everyone else, I don't get it. I think that the courts need to the justice system in this country needs to acknowledge that there is a huge disparity in the way that certain ethnic minorities are seen, are treated when they go through the justice system compared to their white counterparts. I think that they need to acknowledge the way that women are treated differently to men and vice versa, that go through the justice system. I think they need to be more aware of that, and they need to take that into account, in the sense of they need to acknowledge, okay, so you might be from this particular background. Would I be giving this same sentence to you if you were white? Like, I understand that, because we know that there is a disparity. But surely the answer to that is that when it comes to sentencing, it should be consistent regardless of background and ethnicity and religion. So I don't know. I do think it's well intentioned, but I think that, and I do think there's evidence there that shows that there's a disparity that definitely needs to be taken into account. I worry that this is just going to flip it the other way, and also, not that this should matter, but it plays heavily into right-wing rhetoric, particularly around all this two-tier policing nonsense as well. And I think that it plays into the hands of the likes of Farage and Reform to say, and I've heard people saying this today, oh, so basically if you're white and straight, then you're gonna get all the heavy sentences, but if you're a gay black man, then you're gonna get away with murder. Whereas actually what it will probably do in reality is it will hopefully bridge the gap between the disparity that we know exists, where
mm.
people of certain backgrounds are more likely to be treated harsher. But I
Yeah.
don't think this is the way to do it.
So the intention behind this is to tackle the idea that judges are more harsh towards certain groups of people. That is a statistical fact. I just don't think this is perhaps the best way to go around it. So from what I was reading, that when it comes to like a pre-sentence report guideline thing, which is the report that a judge can get or receive, either at a request from a lawyer or even from themselves about this person's background, their personal history, is that when it is being argued in court by, I use the word lawyer, I always get mixed up between solicitor, lawyer, barrister, whatever, their legal representative, is that the judge actually, in most cases, almost always accepts the circumstances of a person within those reports that are given to them to say, this person was from an abusive background, this person suffers with alcoholism, whatever it might be. They're almost always accepted. But what we also do know in combination with that is that when it comes to either sympathy or harshness towards certain groups, it does massively fluctuate within the justice system. I just don't think this approach is the best way. I think we would need to make sure that there's more standardized sentencing, meaning in terms of the severity within a frame. So if somebody can get if someone's going to be going down for assault, it's not just one sentence right now. It's not like you're going exactly away for 2 years. It's a range. It might be, everything from 6 months to 3 years, and that judge gets to decide where in that time frame they fit with that specific person, with that specific instance. I think they just need to tackle that a little bit more somehow. I don't know the best method for it, but there is biases that exist and they do need to be tackled. But I don't ultimately think this is the best way to go about it, because if we go for the standard that judges already accept the current standard of pre-sentencing reports about an individual and their circumstances, we may see a justice system in the future where everybody from any background can try and then put this forward as an excuse to reduce their sentence when they might not necessarily be entitled to it. So with this guidance, if they're talking about, if I'm from a deprived ethnic minority background from a specific religion, you might get a person who is in those circumstances, and that has affected their ability to navigate the world and make choices in many different ways. That is absolutely true, but you're also going to get people who might come from that same background but may have come from a really well-off family, and they don't have the same quote-unquote excuses or reasoning behind their actions, and I don't know, I feel like it just wouldn't be applied properly in the right way, especially at the
But I
fact as
suppose,
well.
go
I
on.
think class is also a driving factor of all of this. So I think focusing even on, ethnicity or religion in this case is actually probably less helpful than it would be to focus on something like class.
Yeah, I think surely the sensible way to do it is, which they should be doing anyway, is looking at the individual case of the person in front of you, and all of the elements of that. And if there is evidence that being part of a certain demographic has influenced you in a way that's unfair, that means that perhaps you would have gone down a different path or maybe not committed the crime that you committed, then okay, if that can be proved and there's evidence for that, then take that into account. But shouldn't our justice system be doing that anyway? What I don't like is this idea, and in fairness, I've not read the details of this, and it'd be interesting to see, as more comes out about this, how it would work in practice. But if the argument is basically one of, well, you're from this background, therefore we're going to consider giving you a lighter sentence automatically before everything else is even factored in, then that's definitely a problem. And like I say, when we have had literal people that we've talked to who think that child murderers should be given a lighter sentence because they're victims of racism, personally, I think that's an insane take. And I worry that something like this would lead to more people agreeing with that and saying, yeah, but of course they shouldn't have a life sentence because they're also a victim of horrible things too. Just to say, if anybody needs to hear this, having a tough time in life for whatever reason doesn't excuse committing horrific crime. It might explain it, and I think those things do need to be taken into account when trying to understand why somebody might have committed a certain crime. And obviously, there are circumstances where if somebody's been influenced by something specifically, and or they've not been in the right headspace for whatever reason, and all those things are factors that play into why somebody might commit a crime, and that should be looked at. But being the victim of discrimination in any way, shape, or form doesn't give you a free pass to. Yeah, it's like the whole Elon Musk with the autism thing, right? And my sister said something brilliant about this, which is the fact that he can get away with doing a Nazi salute, and people just say, "Oh, it's because he's autistic." But if she wiggles a leg because she's got an actual tick that she has, or like a coping mechanism that she has because of her autism, people look at her strange, and she can't get away with it. And I think when somebody's difference is used to excuse their shitty behavior, I think that's a problem, and I don't think that should be going on in our courts. I really don't.
Yeah,
Um,
again, I don't understand the judiciary fully. I think maybe they should move more to like a blind sentencing type of situation where they come up with a system where somebody's blindly sentenced without knowing the specific background of that person. So then it could be used more fairly. So if they could use a formula, I don't know, just something better where if there's a old white judge looking down on a young black boy who's going down for, I don't know, stealing something, we know that in these situations they are more biased towards these groups of people. So I feel like a better approach would be coming up with some situation where whatever sentence they're going to get, it has somehow been decided by something that is blind to who that person is and their specific background. Um, um, to make it somehow more fair in how people are being sentenced. Because obviously we've got multiple issues in all layers of the justice system, from policing to the CPS to obviously then the courts and then even to prisons. But I think one place where we could have that kind of blindness towards bringing justice to somebody, it could be through that method. We do give discretions in certain cases in many different ways, right? Like people can agree to disagree. I'm not going to decide which side I'm on this, but you've got cases like the Gypsy Rose case in America, right? Where I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but that's the young girl who, anyone correct me in the comments if they know the story if I'm wrong, but she was a girl who was brought up by her mother who had Munchausen's by proxy, and she basically made her daughter sick on purpose through her like mental health disease. Is that the correct term for it? Munchausen's by proxy, and she eventually conspired to kill her mother with a boyfriend, I think, that she met online. And the prison sentence that she got for conspiring with that was less than what it would have been if she just happened just to kill her mother and there was no circumstance.
That's taking into account the full facts of the individual case. That isn't, they've not, and I agree, and I think that was the right thing. But the point there is she still went to prison. She still got a sentence, because she still committed murder. And the argument around taking all the other things into account, and it's quite possible that is all they're trying to do, which is why I said, and I agree with you, that it probably is well intentioned. It is designed to bridge this gap of inequality that we have, where people of certain backgrounds are being unfairly treated in the justice system. But surely we should be taking every case, oh God, at the risk of sounding like Trump talking about, taking everything on merit, but we should be taking every case as it comes and looking at the individual specifics regardless. It shouldn't matter whether you're from a minority background or not. Like you talk about class, you could be a white working class man that's grown up on a in an area with huge levels of poverty, who's ended up in a life of crime because it's been the only way to put food on the table for a family, right? That should be taken into account as well. And it feels like this is excluding certain things, and I wouldn't want it to be used the opposite way, where they say, well, because you're not on this list of sort of special cases, we're not gonna take anything else into account. But I don't know. I'm open to learning more about it and to to understanding it better. But
Yeah, there's so much nuance to this, and it's not a short conversation. I know this is again the second America case that I'm bringing up, but it's only because our courts are less transparent. We don't have as much access to our court system as they do in America. It's very transparent over there. But there was the famous case of a guy called Brock Turner. This happened, I can't remember how many years ago, maybe sometimes I'd say 5, but it could have been 10. I don't know. He was a young guy who was, I think he was like 19. He was in college and he was like training to be like a professional swimmer, I think. And he raped a girl. And I apologize because I cannot remember this girl's name, but I remember Brock's because this case gets brought up so many times. So I apologize to that victim. It was argued in court, and the judge agreed with this, that sentencing him too harshly would affect his career as an athlete, and that argument won. And he actually got a less harsh sentence because of it. And these are the types of situations where you have these biases, not just even necessarily something that's a problem with UK court or US court. It could be a problem with men. It could be a problem with women. It could be a problem with anyone, because everyone has their own biases based on their experiences. So we definitely need to come up with a system, if we're just talking about the court specifically, where somehow they come up with a system where they remove the bias that people have inbuilt into them. And obviously, when it comes to the case of Brock Turner, judges like that should just be impeached, really, to be honest.
Her name was Chanel Miller. I've just had a look.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Chanel.
It's awful that we have, because we see it here as well, where there's this, people like to talk about two-tier policing. There is a two-tier justice system. There absolutely is, but it's not in the way that a lot of people on the right would like to tell us that it is. But yeah, so like I say, I don't know. I feel it's well intentioned, and it's trying to solve a problem that absolutely needs solving. But I worry that certainly at least the way in which it's been talked about at the moment, and the way in which it's been sort of talked about in the media, I think is not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Like I say, I'm happy to have this conversation again in a week or two once we've got more information. And
yeah, it is an interesting conversation. I do just want to remind everyone, though, because again, this has been weaponized and framed. I'm not here to defend Labour. I just like the truth. This is not a Labour decision. It's been framed that way in the media. This is an independent body that was created to make these decisions, and when they're made, they can't be interfered with. The only way to change this decision would be to change the law, or obviously try and work with the council to get them to go in a certain direction. But ultimately, we technically don't have any power over them unless we pass legislation to do that. So this is not a Labour thing. In actual fact, it did say in the report that the Tories had an opportunity to intervene in this and they didn't. And Labour are trying to do something about it. I don't know where everybody falls in this conversation. As Callum said, it is something that needs tackling. Is this the right way? That's an ongoing discussion. But again, being weaponized as this is the Labour Party going against white people, it's been weaponized in the culture wars, and I'm sure it will continue to be so. It's all over GB News and all these types of people. Reform are all over it. And again, we can't fix the problems that we have until we work with the reality that we're in. The reality is it's not Labour's fault, not necessarily the Tories' fault either, because they would have had to pass legislation to change this. But ultimately, let's work with what we have to fix the problems that we have, instead of making it into a culture war, because it just shows that people don't actually care about the victims. They don't care about fixing the system. They just want to weaponize this.
And something definitely needs to be done to bridge that gap, where people from certain minority groups are penalized at a harsher rate than their white counterparts. Absolutely. Is this the way to do it? Not 100% sure. But isn't it great that we can have nuanced conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. We have gone way over. I do apologize, guys, if anybody's had to leave or is running to jump off anywhere, but thank you for staying with us this long. So that's the end of the tonight's show. Thank you to everyone who joined in, and thank you, Callum, for being an amazing guest. And just remember, if you haven't already, then like the stream. It helps get the video out there and does all these lovely things to the algorithm. And if you want to see us grow, then you can donate to us by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, where you can support us either monthly or with a one-off payment or a donation. Help us please become a full-time media organization. That is our goal. We're slowly getting there. We're going to keep going, and hopefully in the future we'll have a lovely studio where we can all sit around a table and just moan about politics all day. I am Lewis. See you next time.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.